Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, the Device and App Tampering Epidemic, what marketplaces need to do to know in 2025. I'm Victor Cavalcanti, your host of today's session, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with our guests, experts, Anup Pamu from Lalamove and Mukul Seth from HungerStation. I will let them introduce themselves in a second.
Thanks, Victor.
First
So
of all.
my name is Anup, and I currently lead the global risk for Lalamove. Lalamove is an on-demand logistics company with a lot of presence in Southeast Asia and Lalamove and in LATAM as well. Um, I think I have about yeah, I have a lot of years of experience. Let me just put it that way. I'm not that old, but I, I have quite a bit of experience in analytics, and then I think a little over a decade in fraud. Glad to be here today.
Yeah. Thanks, Anup. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone. I'm Mukul. I currently work as product manager at HungerStation, where I currently lead fraud prevention domain. I've been in HungerStation for almost 2 years now. I might not have as much experience as Anup, but I definitely have some insights that might be useful for marketplaces. So happy to share them when I get the chance, but glad to have glad to have you all here.
And me, myself, as I said, my name is Victor Cavalcanti. Pleasure to be with you all here. I am the head of customer success for Incognia. I've been in the company for 5.5 years, more or less. Before that, I've had a consultancy background, and I've been leading the customer success team here for the past 3 or 4 years. And that means that I've been I'm acquainted with this problem, in many fronts with many customers and many markets. So I believe I also can contribute a little bit to the discussions here. So without further ado, let's begin. What we're going to cover today is we have a couple of sessions. The first one is first we'll cover the basics about how fraudsters use device and app tampering and how it impacts marketplace platforms. Then we will discuss how it can be tricky to detect those toolings, detect tampering specifically. We will then talk about specific tampering tools and techniques we have seen fraudsters using recently. And lastly, the $1 million question, that is how strategies that we can use to fight back against those things, right? So make sure to stick around. We're going to cover a lot of ground today, and hopefully it will be enlightening to everybody. So again, once more, without further ado, this time for real, let's jump into the problem. So the first session here we're going to cover is, as I said, overview of the problem. And I want to make sure that we settle the ground for everybody. We have many people from different contexts here, and we want to make sure that we are everybody on the same page for the beginning of this conversation. So I'd like to start with Muku. I have a question for you. Can you tell us about how fraudsters leverage device and app tampering to commit fraud?
Oh, that's a great question, right? So I don't know how many of us have already used WhatsApp clone, right? Like you have multiple numbers and then you try to use a WhatsApp clone to have a different account, right? Imagine this at the same extent, right? Fraudsters trying to do this, but with, let's say, infinite number of accounts. They have ways to just clone their apps, and they can have multiple accounts accessing your device or your app, which essentially imagine a room full of an infinite number of devices that the fraudsters can keep creating and attack your platform. It's as simple as that, right? And this is where the app cloning technology or emulators come in play, right? So app cloners essentially are a single click tool where you can just clone an app and change the parameters according to what you need and what you want the app to do, right? For example, you want to change your location from, let's say, Hong Kong to Brazil. It's as easy as it is, right? Just use an app cloner app, single click, and you're good to go. Emulator, you can just have infinite number of devices emulating on your system and then just keep attacking the marketplace that you want to. Let's say you find a loophole on a new user, you can have multiple benefits. You just keep creating those new accounts and then keep accessing those accounts from multiple devices and attack the platform. It's as easy as it sounds, right? Over to you, Anup, if you have anything to add, or Victor.
I think I'm okay. You summed it up pretty well. Uh, but yeah, if Victor has anything, then sure.
No, I can keep. I have a couple questions here in the session, so we can jump for the next question here. That is, uh, how has the problem of tampering evolved in the past few years? What do you think it's driving those changes? So basically, again, a little bit of history here. Anoop said that he has over 10 years of experience, so I'm gonna address the question to him here.
Okay, so let me just say that my experience with mobile devices goes far more than 10 years. And I think when the first Android devices came out, like 15, 17 years ago, I think more than that, it was the domain of nerds. It was the domain of coders, enthusiasts, right? So we were the guys who were looking at how to actually mod our devices. And it wasn't, it wasn't where you had this data or this information easily available. When you talked about cloning, when you talked about rooting your device or stuff like that, it was niche forums, or it was where you'd most probably need to go up on the dark web and then look up on how to do those stuff. Most of the sites that were on the dark web are no longer on the dark web. They're on the surface level. You can Google it and find them. You don't need a Tor browser. You don't need anything special to do that. The second thing is, Google has just gotten better. I think it's more capable now of finding more niche subjects that ideally were not niche subjects, uh, maybe even 5 years ago. And I think there's also an increased reliance by itself on mobile devices. 10 years ago, we were not using mobile devices as much as we are using them now. I still remember when I was in my previous company in Uber, we were still going into markets where the mobile penetration was 30%, 50%. And I think right now, even in most third world countries, you have um, a very good mobile penetration. You actually have a good 70 to 80 percent penetration in most of these places. So now a lot more people are aware of these devices. A lot more people are actually using these devices. And now this is the third part, that when you move into places that do have economic issues, right? Where people are maybe not earning as much, the tendency for them to actually look at opportunities to exploit something is much, much higher. And I think that is one of the things that is driving this, right? The launch of AI, everything else is fine. It makes it easier for them to get those answers that they want. But I do think these are some of the things. I think the last one would be where, at least post COVID, the entire mobile marketplace itself, the boom has been so massive that I don't think people have actually taken the time to put those ideal security measures in place. So more loopholes, more open areas for people to exploit.
Right. So one 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 aspect of what Anoop said, that is, that now information is so much easier to have access to, is that before, like he said, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that, it was a niche thing. So you had a couple people able to do that, and now literally everybody can do so. There are, in answering one of the questions that showed up here too. I hope I'm saying you pronounce your name correctly. No Pratma. You don't need to jailbreak the device to clone your app, because literally you have apps that allow you to do so. You literally download an app, you select the app that you want to clone, and through the application, with a very intuitive interface, you can clone some apps, for example. So you don't need, not even need to do this kind of things, so to jailbreak. So it's easy. So what that means is that you have access now, your whole user base has access to this, literally. So it went from a problem of a few to a problem of everybody now has an access to that. So whenever a breach is found by someone, they can be exploited by many people. And those things also, again, they're so easy to do. that people now can use this for very simple things, like for example, promo abuse in, I don't know, food delivery companies, right? So now you can literally create a new account with hundreds of apps cloned. You can even run some automations if you want in those applications, and you can have hundreds of instances of the same application running at the same time, creating new accounts, so you can have a free lunch, every day, for example. The same goes for fraud farms. Before, you had to have a whole setup, to be able to actually have a fraud farm. But now with a single device, with cloners, for example, you can have one device running, and you even have emulators proper now for mobile, that you can run an emulator inside one, for example, Android device, to emulate an Android, and then the applications inside of it. So you can also have this kind of thing very easy with a few clicks. Okay. Now, going to the second session here, the impact of tampering, right? I kind of cover a couple of things here with promo abuse, for example, how systematic, anything that is systematic in the fraud world is naturally a problem. But I would like to throw a couple questions in the direction of our experts here. So, Mukul, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the types of downstream fraud that are enabled by tampering?
Yeah, for sure. So I would actually echo what you said, right? Like you were mentioned that you can have free lunch, right? Let's put some emphasis on it. Like how do you get that free lunch, right? For example, imagine a food delivery company offering a 50% discount on the first order, right? What you do is for every day for lunch, you create a new account and then you just order that lunch, right? And you just wouldn't stop here, right? You would also, if once you know that you can get this food for 50%, you will not stop at one meal. You will keep ordering for, let's say, oh, I'll order for everybody that I know, right? And then imagine this doing for like actual real people, right? You are doing it with 10 group of 10 friends doing it together. But imagine a single person doing this at a scale, placing 200 orders in a day, right? So they can just get this promotion abuse. So what I'm trying to get here is promotion abuse. They can just hamper your growth by eating up all your marketing spends on just this growth, right? Like you which looks like a growth to the company, it might not actually be a real growth, right? It's just fake users that are trying to exploit the promotion that you're running. Another example could be refund abuse. Like let's say you have a no questions asked refund policy. They would just come in, start attacking your refund by creating new accounts. There could be other samples of like just optimizing cancellations, any policies that they can exploit just creating these multiple identities, which you think that they are different identities, eventually they are the single identity, right? Behind this, all these devices, behind all these accounts, there is a single person who's doing all of this. So those are the downstream frauds that can happen due to this: promotion abuse, refund abuse, cancellations, anything that you can think of. Also any other like fake GPS spoofing, your riders pretending to travel extra when they are actually not traveling that kind of distance, right? So parity in this payouts that you are doing to your drivers. So anything of these sorts can be your potential attack points by these fraudsters. You're on mute, Victor. I think Victor is.
Yeah, sorry. 5 years of working remotely, and we
I
still
left
need
Victor speechless, huh?
I was asking if you had, if Anoop, you had anything to add to this type of frauds, as I believe you guys work
I
in
mean,
different, looking for different
I mean,
ones.
actually similar. It's just that I think I tend to look at different stuff as well. But um, similar to what Mukul said, right? You could end up spending all your money on something that's not even real. But I think this also sort of messes with a lot of other things. It messes with your forecasting. Your data uh is no longer true, right? So if you're trying to do any forecasting with the existing data and it's fake data, all your forecasts are going to be incorrect, right? So you're going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to get a 30% increase in orders on this particular day, and you're not going to see it. So sometimes it's not just about the amount of money you're spending. Sometimes it's also where you are spending a lot of money on enhancing your existing infrastructure to support that need when that need doesn't really exist, right? So that's one part. I think a lot of things that people don't look at as well is things like streaming, and also when people get paid for streaming, right? Um, China is known for having stream farms. So you could literally pay somebody and say, "Hey, I want 1 million streams so that I can get paid out for this." And then they literally pay that for you, right? So there's obviously licensing issues. There's a lot of other issues that people don't really look at. But yeah, I mean, when you start looking deeper into device tampering, it's sometimes very simple, like what Mukul and Victor said, right? It's maybe they're just using an emulator, or maybe they're just changing their GPS, or maybe they're just using a VPN. And sometimes it's not as harmful as you think, but if it is actually done in a very organized manner, it is something that can actually literally bring a company down. We actually have something called service disruption, right? So if it's an organized attack where thousands of emulators are trying to place orders, or thousands of emulators are trying to gain access to your streaming software, it's going to be where you just crash. It like the most recent one, right? Like Netflix was saying, oh, actually, we had the most number of people actually stream the Mike Tyson fight. But if you actually look at that specific data, you'd be like, but you don't have that many subscribers, right? So how did you even get to that threshold? But hey, no, not everybody asks those questions. So if it's important to you, you should be asking those questions, because you could be losing some money there. Or on the other side, you could be leaving some money on the table as well.
Yeah, there is another angle there as well. Is, for example, um, there are some cases of identity fraud, being
Yes.
facilitated by tampering. For example, you can use tampering to fake the camera. Instead of using the camera to take a selfie, for example, you can take a picture from the gallery, and you can literally impersonate someone in a service like that. Like, for example, food, delivering food, for example. So there are a couple cases of people that had unfortunate luck to find some offenders in situations like that. And once they are banned from the platform, they can get back there impersonating someone else, a friend, a family member, or whatever, and then they're back again, offending and making, probably committing crime and putting people in danger. And now the platform is at risk because you're not able to actually say who is there, on the other side of the delivering the food or whatever you're delivering. So it can, it's not more about financial. You're probably going to have some financial problems if that escalates, if the offense is too critical. But you're putting your users at risk, and definitely that's something that nobody wants, right? Also, um, I have now we have another question here. Before that, actually, one another example I have is this fraud identity thing. We have seen a bank in Latam that suffered with first payment default. Literally, they were creating accounts. The people creating accounts in other names, in the name of other people, through automations and things like that, tampering, faking the identification, the biometric recognition, and etc. And at first, the bank said, "Oh, there's not a problem here. This is the person. They're not committing any kind of fraud. There's no money circulating in those accounts, etc." But 3 months later, they took a credit, they took a loan, and didn't pay, never paid that, and they all were tied to the same set of devices, for example. So now, and they believe that there was a credit problem, and no, it was a fraud problem, because they're leaving that the door was open and these people were getting in. So it was a funny, I mean, sad for the bank, but it was a funny story to be on the other side here, proving that to them. So we can get to that level of complexity. Now, before jumping for the next session, answering another question that we received here from Danny Polk. How many accounts do you usually see people accessing using app cloners? What's the scale like? The number of accounts, they can vary. but it can get up to thousands, literally. We have seen devices accessing thousands of accounts in a period of a month, for example. So it can get really out of hand if you let
So,
people.
Can I add to that? The thing is that
yeah,
the science by itself is not very it's not 100%. Let me just put it that way. So there could be a chance that you're detecting an emulator and it's not. There could also be a chance that you're actually detecting a genuine device and it's an emulator. Um, Emulators have gotten really, really good um, over the past couple of years. I'd say at least over the past 3 years, emulators have gotten really good. I know for a fact that we have had to get very, very creative in trying to actually figure out how to track these. So I think again, it depends if on how much of experience you've had with emulators, how well you've actually done previously in detecting them. Because to be very honest, if you have not detected emulators until now, there's a very good chance there are already emulators on your system. I'm pretty sure they're app cloners, things like that, that are already on your system. Two, if you think that you have rooted out the problem 100%, you definitely have not. They're evolving a lot quicker then we can actually come up with solutions for them. And I think the third one is if you do have something that is extremely stringent, extremely um, rigid and robust, there's a very good chance you'll be blocking out some genuine users as well.
Cool. You want to add something?
no, I just wanted to say, I was actually reading through the question, right? How many accounts do you guys usually see, right? It's not about the number of accounts that you see. Like you might see, okay, 0.5% of my devices are using app cloners. But these 0.5% devices are like, what are they doing on your platform is the real question, right? You shouldn't ask, okay, 0.51% devices, you're like, okay, they can't do much, but they are what they are attacking you. When they are attacking you with full force, probably they are just attacking all your marketing spends. Probably they can consume 90% of your marketing spend without you even knowing it. So it's not about the number of devices that you have or the number of accounts that you have with app cloners. It's about what is the impact that they're creating on your platform. And that is something that you should always measure, not just the number of devices. So that's pretty much my advice would be here, because I've seen this happening on our platform, and then we realize, okay, app cloning may sound small, but it's not actually small if we look at the whole picture.
Great. And 100% agree, by the way. It always seems small, 0.5 something that people tend to ignore that, but the
Yeah.
problem is how much money they're going to make you lose. Going for the next session, the detection challenge. Anoop kind of covered a little bit about this, but I want to take a step forward here and go a little bit deeper and say what makes tempered devices and tempered apps so difficult to detect? Why are the traditional detection methods often ineffective against them? So you're saying that they're evolving very fast, and what's making it so hard to keep track? To keep... For Anup, yeah, and Iranu, your turn
Sorry.
to.
So there are some good things that happen and there's some bad things that happen. So until a couple of years ago, we had a lot more access to device data, which now has been classified as PII. When we lost access to that, we also lost access to detecting proper fraud. So both Apple and Android, they've done their part. Like Google has done their part. They've said, "Oh, we're going to give you something that is as sticky as like an IMEI or your SIM card number," but maybe they are not. At least we've noticed they are not. They're very easy to replicate. They're very easy to uh, let's just say they're extremely easy to bypass on most platforms. So until unless you have built something on your system or you're using a third party to do that for you, which is going to have a more sticky signature to that user and that device, there's a very good chance that you are not going to be detecting um, a tampered device. And again, I think there's something that I previously said as well. It's about the level of tampering, right? Sometimes just having your developer options open is not that bad. But then, are you okay with them using a mock GPS? Similarly, it could also be where the device is rooted, but then there's nothing wrong with the device. Are you okay with that? Most probably, if you're a banking institution, you're not. But maybe if you're an app delivery device, like you're just into deliveries, maybe you're okay with that. I don't know. So it also depends on the kind of risk exposure that you want, which complicates things a lot more than they should be.
Okay, Muku, a question for you now. What do you see in your experience, how fraudsters have tried to evade those detections and when using tampering devices or apps? What have you seen there?
Yeah. So Anup rightly mentioned, right? All of these detection technologies have become so complicated that every day you are finding some new pattern that they are trying to do, right? So maybe there is an advanced app cloner that we might not be able to recognize, right? We are putting all our efforts on single type of device integrity or let's say any tampering detection, but they have changed their tampering detection, right? And another thing that sometimes what I see is that they also like try to go in your app, debug it, and understand what kind of detection you are trying to use, and then bypass it. Let's say you are calling Google API, right? They will try to block that API at that point in time and just try to evade that information from getting to you, right? It could happen to any of your like external connections that you are having with any of the vendors or any of the detection tools that you are using. They might try to evade that connection altogether. So these are few tactics that they play around. They will try to have some kind of probably they'll just factory reset their device just to pretend that it's a new device, and then they'll do the same thing again just to look like it's a fresh device, but it's actually in reality it's not, right? So these are few things that they just keep on doing to evade all your rule prevention, all your ML model detection, all your risk scoring, and all of that. To evade all of this, they'll try any form or means that is possible. Either it's app tampering, either it's factory resetting their device, or it's by just bypassing the API calls, or any of those mechanisms. Yep.
Nice. Okay, now speeding up a little bit, let's go to the fourth section here. That is tactics and tools that they have been using. So, as we kind of touched a little bit on the beginning of the conversation, that these things are much more available now, easier to access, easier to find. I'd like to ask Muku here, what are some of the most common tampering methods you are seeing in fraudsters using recently?
Yeah, I mentioned this in my previous statements as well, right? I would like to emphasize it again, right? App cloners, you could be seeing that they are doing a good job, but when you look at the overall picture, when you connect the dots together, app cloner will seem to be like the biggest issue on, like, let's say a delivery platform, like GPS spoofing on probably a ride hailing platform where drivers are trying to spoof the demand and supply, right? So GPF spoofing, app cloners, emulators, jailbreaks, and also like you will see that factory reset is also one of the thing. Let's say if you are trying to have device fingerprinting as one of the identifier, they will try to spoof that identifier as much as possible, right? So app cloning will generally turns out to be the biggest contributor to fraud mechanisms, at least on food delivery platforms, and then GPS spoofer, and then VPN for certain cases like Anup said, right? So and then there are also like some advanced cases where fraudsters actually just tamper with the payloads that you are sending. Let's say I'm trying to get a device fingerprinting data from a vendor, they will try to spoof that, right? So there are also cases of tampering with your data, like the data that you receive is actually genuine or not. So there has to be like two-way signature from your vendor, whoever you are trying to assess, to confirm that this is the intelligence that you have received, or the device intelligence or the device information is actually what is right or wrong, right? They can just make it sound look like it's a wonderful device, it's a fresh device, but it might actually be a bad device just using technologies to change the information altogether. So device masking is like essentially device masking, app cloning, and all of that. I mean, there are a lot more. Anup can share probably what he sees in logistics as well. But in my opinion, these are the major ones that you see at least on food delivery and e-commerce or like ride hailing.
Yeah, you have anything to add there, Anup? Some of the most, I mean, sophisticated, that seems like magic kind of stuff that you're seeing there. You're,
Sorry, I was on mute. What of most Mughal said, a lot of them are like man-in-the-middle attacks. So this is where, again, something that I mentioned previously, right? If you don't get the basics right, where you're not obfuscating your app, you're not obfuscating your payloads, um, it's pretty easy for them to actually see what's on your app. Um, I mean, a lot of free software will do that for you. You don't need like some special developers to be a very talented developer to see payloads, right? It's pretty easy to actually come across that. And then if you know what those are, it's again very easy to replicate those payloads as well, um, both to internal APIs as well as your third-party APIs. But if you're looking at what are the most sophisticated tampering tactics, I think more recently, it's been a conversation that I've actually had with AWS as well, because we do use some of their ML specifically. Um, and then we were asking them, we're like, hey, do you know how we can actually detect deep fakes and how we can actually detect if there are artifacts within AI generated photographs or AI generated ID cards and stuff like that? Because to be very honest with you, we couldn't. So with a lot of companies, we're trying to save cost, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to do 100% um, KYC with everything. A lot of times you'd be like, hey, the risk score does not require me to do a background check. So I'm just going to do my very general OCR extraction and I'm going to compare photographs. And if it passes, it's well below my pay grade, right? And it was only for one analyst who was a very big deepfake enthusiast. And he was like, hey, have you seen this artifacting around the ears and around the neck? And we said, what do you mean there's artifacting around the nose and the neck? He said, oh, you see, this is where they're using a deepfake, but the number of hexagons on it are not as many as you want. So he said for it to look like an actual face, it should be anything over 1 billion hexagons. And he said, well, maybe they don't have a very good phone, so they're only able to generate about 8 to 10,000 hexagons, and that leaves a little blocky looking neck, which looks a little blurry. It doesn't look like an actual neck. And we said, oh, that's interesting. So we actually took a lot of that data and went to AWS and said, hey, can we actually build a model that can detect this? The interesting part is AWS actually told us they don't have enough data to actually share with us to allow our model to learn. So they basically said, right now you're on your own, you're in the Wild West. There's actually no model that can currently detect this. And for us to get a data set that can actually detect this kind of spoofing would maybe take a year or more, right? So right now you have people on their mobile phones using readily available apps that can make fake ID cards, that can make fake photographs, uh, and then create a completely synthetic identity that most probably doesn't even exist, right? And it most probably would pass your very basic fraud checks. So until unless you're going to go all the way back and say, oh, we're going to manual review each one of these, and we're going to do a background check on each one of these, which both of them are extremely expensive. You're not going to be detecting uh, these new trends, at least not anytime soon.
um, and nice, and by nice I mean scary, right? Deep fakes are very scary. So I see a couple questions have showed up, but I would now answer then. I'll try to answer, not me. We were going to try to answer then at the Q&A, right?
Yeah, I think it's
Uh,
better. They're interesting questions actually. So I would like to keep them for Q&A.
yeah. Okay. Now coming for the last session here before the Q&A. is the, again, $1 million question, and actually going to address probably some of the questions that were asked. That
Yeah.
is how to fight back, right? So now that we scared everybody, can you share a little bit on the most effective ways on that marketplaces and platforms can combat such device and app tampering techniques?
Okay. To be very honest with you, keep your basics right. If you want to be really effective, I think you need to check those basic boxes. Learn how to obfuscate your code. Learn how to have a digital signature that is being sent with all your API calls. Um, Most recently, somebody was consulting for. The reason they got hacked was because they forgot to use a HTTPS. It's sometimes as simple as that. On one single API of theirs, they were basically calling a HTTP, right? And that led to a giant problem for them. So simple things like this. Even just use the things that Google provides or Windows provides. Just use those developer stacks that they're giving you and just do the basics. I think that itself would be a very good start. But again, it also depends on how deep you want to go in. Is this something you want to build versus something you want to buy? If your engineering is already or your tech stack is pretty good and your engineering is very mature, I think that's something you can build and be pretty effective at it as well. But at the same time, it might be where maybe your tech stack is not perfect, or maybe it could also be that you're still evolving, you're a new company. It might make sense to actually buy something like Incognia or anything else to actually help you with it. But yeah, I think if you get the basics right, you are 90% there.
Um, and for you, Mgu, anything to add? I mean, like the same. What have you been doing, or what do you think that is effective against those
Yeah.
techniques?
So, like Anup mentioned, right? Get your basics right. So I would relate it to a real life scenario, right? What happens when you are sick, right? You try home remedies for a while, they don't work out. You go seek professional help. You go to a doctor, see them, and then they prescribe, okay, do this, do this, do that, right? It's the same thing with this. You try as much as you can, you firefight whatever you can on your platform, and once you know that you are not able to fix it and the fraud is not stopping, you go and seek professional help. By professional help, it could be a consultant who can help advise you, a tool uncover the problems that you have not uncovered yet. It can be like just benchmarking your internal tools against other entities, what or other market players who are what they are doing and how they are counteracting to this. So it's just as simple as that, right? Just get the basics right, as Anup mentioned, but also make sure that these basics are not just coming out of hypothesis. Benchmark them, uh, seek help, understand, uncover your problems, do the discovery, do proof of values with multiple vendors, see what they can figure out from your data, right? So it's all about understanding what your current tech stack is and where can you fit on these tools, and how do you uncover the problems that you have not uncovered yet. So it's as simple as that, I would say.
Yeah, I can share a small case we had here. That is, we had a customer. I won't name names, the market, not anything, but a very big one, a couple million users, and at some point we figure out a failure in their app, not tied to us at all. It was a security breach that was so big that was literally, leaving everything open to an attack. So at some point they even come us complaining that we're not protecting them at some specific thing. But the analogy was like, man, I am the doorman, right? And your house right now doesn't even have walls. I cannot protect everything. We cannot do your work for you. So yeah, having the basics, it's very important, because you expose not only yourself, but you can even expose the tools that you're using to protect yourself. So you're, in another level of being in the open. So yeah, it helps a lot for sure. And as I said, I have seen some big companies failing into that as well in the past 5 years. um, Another thing that I believe can help here is there is a here in Incognia we have something that is very solid against this kind of stuff. That is, since you cannot trust the device, right? Because basically what we discussed here is that information that is being seen, you cannot trust the device, the data that you're collecting from that device, and etc. It leaves you open to say nothing coming from here is trustable. But you can go a level deeper. That is, you can tie those kind of problems to specific places, and you can use, for example, things like location to prevent some types of fraud. So we have things like environment, a feature that we call environment linked to fraud, for example, where you can use that two ways. Either for example, we receive some sort of fraud feedback from the customer saying we are seeing something fraud type X is going through everybody and is happening a lot. Is the feedback. We receive this. We're going to detect the devices and the places where this is coming from, and we're able to put that location in a restrictive watch list. And every kind of request coming from that place is now tagged as high risk because of that. So they have the behavior that we want to avoid or prevent. So when we say location here, we are very precise. We can get to the apartment level, as we say. So I'm able to distinguish apartment A from B. I don't know that is on the second floor, apartment A, the second floor, apartment B, the second floor. I know that they're two different places. But yeah, so we can get to that level instead of like literally getting a cannonball to block the whole building, for example. So this kind of stuff here can also be very useful. Meaning, this is naturally, I'm not lying. This is a step further. That's not the first layer, as I said, of prevention that we can have, but it have very solid results, and we have been seeing that deliver great value with pretty much all of our customers so far. Okay, now we have time for the Q&A. We have a couple questions that we're going to address. But before that, we also have a poll to ask. Yeah, so it's popping up on your face now while we're thinking a poll about some of the topics that we covered here. And if you could please answer this, it would be lovely for marketplace risk, and we could use that information later. All right, so now for the Q&A. We have a couple questions. Let's go in order here. Based on your experience, which operating system, iOS or Android, encounters fraud more frequently? I don't know about you guys, but usually we have seen Android being more open to it. But to be honest, recently in the last months, we have seen some markets being more affected by iOS, which it's counterintuitive. At the beginning, 5 years ago, I would never say that. But yeah, recently, I don't know what's happening, but iOS have been showing up quite a lot. But I don't know if you
I think
have.
it depends on in which I think a lot of it depends on the type of market that you're servicing and also the market vertical that you're servicing. Like I'd go as far as to say that mobile devices are one, but you also have web OS. So it depends on which device is majorly used by your customers. If a majority of them are using websites, then it most probably will be a Windows, right? Windows systems are notorious right now for us to try and tag. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to tag them. Mac OS is a little better. Linux is not too bad. Androids are not too bad. iOS are not too bad as well. But if you're just talking about purely the technical aspect of can you tell if a device is tampered, I think Windows systems are the worst. We cannot tell if the device has been tampered. Even if we are until unless we are like literally scanning all their ports, there is no way for us to know.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I think I think what Anup and Victor already mentioned. But one thing to note here is Android is obviously easier to manipulate, but Apple makes it easier for fraudsters to hide their identity or mask their identity because there are so many privacy policies in place that they can do as many things as they want, right? Like I was mentioning factory reset. They can factory reset it. Sometimes it will be very difficult for us to detect that it's the same device, right? We can see the patterns of this user again and see if they are trying to do the same things that they were doing earlier, like from the same location, right? The Victor that whatever Victor was showing, right? Environment linked fraud. We can detect that these devices are linked using environment linked fraud, but we cannot tell if these are the same devices, right? So iOS is making it complicated for the fraudsters to fight with, and Android is making it easier for fraudster to fight with us, right? So there are both pros and cons for both devices, but you will see that Android is easier for fraudsters, and it's also easier it's not easier for them to on iOS as much, but it's still there are a lot of ways for them to cover their identity is what I would say.
Yes. Okay, there are a couple questions here that I believe touch on the same subject. So Kelly Torres asked, how do we keep up? Where do we begin to try to create offensive or defensive strategies? And Eduardo Pires also asked how to decide if it's time to benchmark your internal tools with an external providers. I believe they're somehow, within the same realm here, offensive. So I'd love to, uh, to Edward's question, my answer may be a little bit biased. So I would leave that to Anup and Mukul.
The best time to benchmark yourself is now. I think, okay, so I'm going to be that person, right? So I
We didn't include
am,
that, right, Anup?
yeah, so I am, at least within the risk industry, I am notoriously known for building, right? So usually people know that if I'm in a company, that means that company is building and we are not buying. But at the same time, I think most uh, most third parties I've worked with were more than willing to actually benchmark with us, because there are certain times where we have found that we were lacking, which also shows us the direction that we need to go in for development. But there are also times where we just see that maybe the amount of investment required for that development is too high. So we might need to actually um, engage with a third party until we can actually get our our internal development up to speed. And there are certain times where we don't catch up and we just say, yep, we're just keeping the third party for now. So if you're asking when is a good time, the good time is now. You can benchmark every 3 or 4 months. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice. There is no bad time to benchmark. Even if you think there is sorry, I was saying, even if you think there is no problem on your platform, it's still good to benchmark. Just see where you stand. And like, I think, like Anup mentioned, right, there are a lot of third party vendors who are happy to collaborate and see how they can help you in just benchmarking alone itself, right? So it's never a bad time. Start now, start and just see the results yourself.
Fantastic.
And I think yeah, there was a question about how do we keep up and how do you try to create offensive strategies? You don't create offensive strategies. You try not to,
Yeah.
because if you go on an all out offensive strategy, especially when you're trying to handle device tampering, I think until and unless you're a banking institution or a financial institution, you should not be on an all out offensive. The I think for banking institutions, for financial institutions, the probability of having a couple of false positives is fine, because the overall integrity of the system is far more important. But if you're in a marketplace, I don't think having an all-out offensive strategy is a good thing. I think you should be more on the defensive side, where you're building up that defense and saying, okay, I might let a couple of bad guys through, but I am confident that I'm at least getting 80, 90% of them. I think that's the direction I would go in.
Cool. Anything to add there?
So it's right. So what Anup mentioned, right? Like let's say if you are a food delivery company or an e-commerce company, you don't really need to avoid all the app tampering, right? There could be situations that they are not as harmful as they are not harming you to an extent that you need to block and everybody out, right? You need to balance your false positives. You need to make sure that your false positives are at minimum level and you are not hampering the experience for a good customer, right? And there is always be a catch. Let's say somebody, for example, if you're a streaming service, somebody could be using VPN for multiple other purposes and not just for your service, right? So how do you balance that out? Like where do you think there's a good point to balance for where to block and who to block and when to block, right? So there will always be a back and forth between user experience and fraud prevention, but you need to find that balance by just experimenting, putting rules on shadow mode, understanding what kind of users would get blocked and understand their patterns, and that would help you make sure that you are not choosing the most offensive strategy and not choosing the most defensive strategy as well, right? So just find the perfect balance.
Have two last questions. Let's try to go through them. So one, the second to last is from Sai Srinivas. Sorry
Yeah.
if I'm not saying that wrong. As Mukul mentioned, fraudsters are trying to debug an app to find any detection methods, code SDKs from platforms like Incognia are embedded in the app. How much ever you might obfuscate the code and can innovate new ways to bypass this? Is there a way we can prevent that? Great
Anup, you're
question.
in.
Sorry, but the answer is yes and no. I'm saying yes because you technically could just encrypt the entire thing. It doesn't cost you that much. Um, so if you're just doing end-to-end encryption, they're never going to know what you're doing. The simpler thing, which is something that I've implemented and consulted with multiple people while I was actually doing this. Um, if you all don't really, uh, if you all don't really want to do any of that, just build a signature SDK. It just is going to send a line of code and only your end can decrypt it. So every time you cannot decrypt it, you know it's not from your system. And you just reject that call. I think that's like the super basic way to go about it, right? Um, is it going to fail sometimes? Sure, probably. There could be an out of sync issue, things like that that could happen. But if you're going, I think the whole idea is just trying to barely stay ahead. I think that's as good as it gets. I think like a fraud person. I think like somebody who's going to fraud my own my own company, right? So I'm always looking for things that people are going to do and for things that I would probably do. Um, but you need to understand that most people who are out there who are trying to hack your system, right? Who are trying to debug your API and find out your calls, there's a very good chance that one, they work for your competitors, right? They most probably are doing that to actually find out how your app works. Two, they most probably are a hacker of some sort and they're doing it for clout, right? But 9 out of 10, the emulators that you see on your system are most probably not high grade hackers. People are always going to engage in the easiest possible fraud, right? So if if you have a if you have a possible loophole and nobody's exploited it for 3 or 4 months, you should worry less about that and should worry more about the simple fraud because that's where you're actually losing money.
100%. It's definitely people is the path of least resistance, right? People will look for the less effort they have to, but to the more gain they can have. So the simple frauds are definitely something that we see happening a lot. All right, last question. We have 2 minutes. The the people who are using emulators as career, what are their signature profiles? It is possible to profile them and find chinks in their attack. Um, um, I'm not sure I follow 100% of the question, but it seems like it's aimed to emulators specifically. What are exactly are the traces that this kind of attack may leave behind, and if we can find patterns and in the behavior of people that is using this to perform some type of attack.
I think
Yes,
very
but yeah,
interesting.
Mukul, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that if somebody is trying to use an emulator, it's most likely that they are trying to also auto write a bot that does things on automatically, right? So auto scripting tool will also be in place, right? So if you see like clicks at a random speed that it's humanly impossible, then I think that will be a pattern that you will see during emulators, right? So they are trying to automate those scripts that can actually keep running and just keep making money for them. So I think that will be the pattern that you will find in these emulators. But over to you, Anup. Like I think you had something to add.
I was actually going the same direction that Mukul was going to go in. I was like, one of the easiest things to do is just look at the capture score. If you see a whole bunch of accounts have the exact same capture score, which is right below your threshold, it most probably is a bot or an emulator. After that, you just need to pull up all the accounts that match that profile. I think the
Yeah.
second one would be if you see a whole bunch of dormant accounts, there is again a very good chance that those are not churned accounts. Those are bot accounts, or those are like, basically accounts that were made with emulators. So the data you already have is actually more than sufficient for you to actually find a pattern. I wouldn't say there's a specific pattern. Different marketplaces have different kinds of patterns. But if you look at your own data, I think it would be very, very apparent very quickly because they would not match the behavior of your regular users.
Excellent. So we just in time covered everything. That's fantastic. I know Heather from Marketplace has something to say, but before, I would like to thank our guests here. Anup and Mukul has been very enlightful to have this conversation. I hope everybody has enjoyed also our conversation here, and that we agree, gave something back to the community. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Anup and Mukul. It was a pleasure to have you guys here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Victor. Always ready to give back to the community. I mean, we all learn together and we fight back. That's how we'll grow, right?
It was
Um,
great. Yeah, it was pretty great. But I'm just saying, when you have a topic as complicated as this, you cannot rush it into like an hour's topic.
Yeah.
This is something that takes a couple of hours to just download, and maybe another couple of hours to look at how you can combat it. But yeah, it was a really good session. I'd say that.